Make no mistake, this is a must-win game for Syracuse football against an opponent that used to be a pushover, but not anymore. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are always free and available wherever you get your podcast, whether you're watching Locked On Syracuse right now on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite audio platform. And on today's show, we are previewing Syracuse's upcoming opponent this Saturday at noon Eastern. It is the home opener for the Orange. They take on their Northeast rival, the UConn Huskies. We're going to go over their offense, their defense, their special teams for a little bit later on in the show. But first, a brief overview of UConn and why they are no longer a pushover for Syracuse football. Syracuse football has got to be on its A game in order to knock off UConn this Saturday. All that and more here on today's edition of Locked On Syracuse. Before we get to everything, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. What are the stakes of this game for Syracuse football? I think it's pretty clear. This is a must-win game on Saturday. You look at the schedule for Syracuse. We know by now that it's not very easy. We know this. If Syracuse wants to make a bowl this year, which requires them to win at least 6 games, they better beat the UConn Huskies on Saturday. Now, Syracuse, they didn't need to upset Tennessee, although it would have been nice if Syracuse could have stolen that one in Atlanta, Georgia, get a win on the board, help you get to that bowl game in 2025. But they didn't need to beat Tennessee. They absolutely have to beat the UConn Huskies, whether it's a 1-point win, a 30-point win, really does not matter. They just have to go out and beat UConn in order to make a bowl in 2025. But the odds on this game suggest that UConn is no longer a pushover opponent for Syracuse. We'll get into the recent history of Syracuse against UConn, but in prior years, this was an automatic, circled win for Syracuse. We don't even need to worry about the UConn Huskies. But not anymore. FanDuel odds makers currently have Syracuse as 6.5-point favorites against UConn on Saturday. Really, this is more about UConn elevating its program rather than Syracuse declining as a program. Because as Syracuse fans, I think we can all agree, the program's heading in a pretty solid direction with head coach Fran Brown in his second year. But UConn is definitely on the up and up. That's a credit to them. And I don't like the UConn Huskies. Let's throw it out right there. I do not like UConn one bit. I hope Syracuse goes out and beats them by 45 on Saturday. But I have to acknowledge that, you know what? UConn is a much better football program this season, last season, and really since Jim Mora has taken over than in prior years. UConn is also coming to the Dome as a pretty confident team. In week 1, they got to beat up on Central Connecticut State, a 59-13 win. I get it's an FCS opponent, but still, you always got to be careful of teams that are coming into your building that are feeling pretty confident in themselves after a week 1 win. Their head coach, Jim Mora, has done a fantastic job. He's in his 4th year as UConn's coach. 2022, he took over a mess of a program. He leads them to a bowl in his first season. They end up losing the Myrtle Beach Bowl, but you know what? They go 6-7 that year. Positive year for UConn football. 2023 was a little bit of a step back. They go 3-9, but in 2024, they go 9-4, and they get the Fenway Bowl victory over North Carolina, which, by the way, North Carolina, that was before head coach Bill Belichick. I don't think North Carolina is going to be a bowl team this season after what we saw on Monday night against TCU. Now, maybe TCU is going to be a top 5-10 team in the country, so that's why they made North Carolina look terrible. But you know what? They came into the game unranked. That was an ugly, ugly game. Sorry, I got sidetracked there. I just had to take a little dig at North Carolina here because that was absolutely hilarious. By the way, Syracuse, they play North Carolina later in the year on Halloween. They better beat North Carolina as well. That is now a must-win game for Syracuse now, just like UConn is. By the way, UConn might be better than North Carolina. But anyway, the history of Syracuse and UConn, the Orange have beaten UConn 5 consecutive times dating back to 2012, and the average margin of victory was 21 points. So that's what I mean when I say this used to be a game where we really didn't have to talk about it all that much. Syracuse, whether they were going to be at home or go on the road, they were going to beat UConn, no problem, no big deal. This is your easy free victory before you have to play a tougher team maybe the following week. But last year, things started to change. Syracuse was a good team, 9-3 in the regular season, 10-3 overall after our Holiday Bowl win, but they only beat UConn 31-24. I do think it's a little bit deceiving the score because at no point during that game did I really feel Syracuse was going to lose that game. But credit to UConn for fighting throughout and actually keeping it a pretty close game, maybe closer than what we thought it was going to be last season. UConn history versus the ACC. Another reason why UConn is a program that's definitely on the rise compared to prior years. 2022, they go 1-2 versus the ACC. They were blown out by Syracuse and NC State, but they did beat Boston College. In 2023, they go winless. They were 0-3 against the conference. And then in 2024, they go 1-3 against the ACC. But here are the results. They play Duke. Duke was a good team last year. They won 9 games. Only a 5-point loss for UConn. They played Wake Forest. Wake Forest was a team that did not make a bowl. UConn kept it close in that one, but they did fall short against Wake Forest, I believe, by 3 points. And then they play Syracuse, which we just mentioned, only a 7-point loss. Then they play in the Fenway Bowl, which we also mentioned, a 13-point victory over North Carolina. The overall point of this segment here is not to stare you, Syracuse fans. It's not to stare you. Syracuse football is still favored to win this game. Syracuse football should beat the UConn Huskies at home. They are probably, at least on paper, a more talented team than UConn. But this is not a free victory. This is not a pushover victory. The line isn't telling you, hey, Syracuse is a 28-point favorite. You don't need to worry about this one. No. UConn deserves a lot of respect. This is not UConn from 2017. This is 2025 UConn with a very good head coach in Jim Mora. He knows what he's doing. They got a very capable offense. Their defense is also very capable as well, which we'll get into later on in the show. This is a game for Syracuse that is not only a must-win game, but also a pretty good test for them to see where they are at this season. If they can go out and beat UConn by a ton of points, then hey, I think Syracuse fans, we should be feeling pretty good about ourselves. If Syracuse wins close, then you know what? UConn is actually a pretty good team. If Syracuse loses this game, we talked about it at the top, they're not making a bowl in 2025. That's really what's at stake here for Syracuse. Absolute must-win game against an improved opponent in the UConn Huskies. What are your thoughts on this matchup? Comment your thoughts in the comments section below. Now, coming up, we'll talk about UConn's offense. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with SupplyHouse. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. Need parts fast for a project? SupplyHouse has next-day delivery. Talk about a real game changer there. Join the free Trade Master program today and start and store serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them, but if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average, in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnCollege and use promo code LockedOnCollege for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. We've done a brief overview of the UConn Huskies. Now let's get into their offense. They are led by quarterback Joe Fagnano, a 6'4", 225-pound grad student. The best thing that you could say about Fagnano is that this is not a quarterback that typically puts the ball in harm's way. He does not make a lot of mistakes. Last week, he went 18 of 25, 72% completion percentage for 260 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Last year for UConn, he played in 10 games, only had a 58% completion percentage, 1,600 yards, 20 touchdowns to only 4 interceptions, a 5-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. That is elite, actually. That is very, very elite. 20-4 right there. Against Syracuse last year, same type of deal. 27 of 48, only 56% completion percentage, which is not very good. 228 yards, not bad. 2 touchdowns, okay. And no turnovers. Sounds like Joe Fagnano. He is not someone that makes a lot of mistakes. He is not someone who is going to put the ball in harm's way a lot of the time. Also not the most mobile quarterback in the world. That's reserved for their backup in Nick Evers. He's more mobile than Joe Fagnano. And at times, Joe Fagnano can struggle with his accuracy. But he's not really going to give you many gifts. Meaning, if you're Syracuse, you're going to have to force a few takeaways, which is not something that they did a week ago against Tennessee. Tennessee did have 1 turnover. That was off a misexchange. That was not Syracuse forcing the issue, rather Syracuse capitalizing on a major blunder by Tennessee. Can they find a way to pick off Joe Fagnano? Last year they couldn't. Hopefully this year they can. Their main weapon on the outside, this is someone that Syracuse might want to consider double covering throughout the game, and he tore up Syracuse actually a year ago. More on that in just a moment. Skyler Bell. He's entering his 5th year of college football, or I should say he is in his 5th year of college football. He did play last week for UConn. He started his career in the Big Ten. This is what I mean. UConn is a more talented team than they've been in prior years. He played 3 seasons at Wisconsin. This is someone who should definitely be respected if you are Syracuse football. He put up over 400 yards and 5 touchdowns with Wisconsin in 2022. He transferred to UConn headed into the 2024 season, and he was terrific. 50 catches, 860 yards, 5 touchdowns. He averaged over 17 yards a catch. And last week, he had a long catch and run touchdown for UConn. I believe it was their first touchdown of the season. And against Syracuse, speaking of Syracuse, 10 catches for 113 yards. That was last year. What's he going to do this year against Syracuse? Against a secondary and Demetrius Samuel and Chris Peel. Chris Peel actually played quite well against Tennessee. Maybe you match up Chris Peel against a guy like Skyler Bell, but he is more than capable of going up against power conference corners. And again, if you're Syracuse, you might want to double cover Skyler Bell. That's their main weapon on the outside that you have to worry about. Their running game, for the most part, is the same as it was in 2024. Darrell Robinson, he did transfer to Auburn, but Cam Edwards and Mel Brown, they are still there. And they, on paper, carved up Syracuse last year. We'll get to that in just a moment. But the duo of Edwards and Brown last week combined for 198 yards on only 15 carries. They use more than just 2 running backs, but those are the main 2 guys for UConn. Over 13 yards a carry. Now, I don't think they're going to run for 13 yards a carry against Syracuse, but Syracuse had a hard time stopping Tennessee's ground game. And UConn, I would not say, is a pushover on the ground either, with the duo of Edwards and Brown. Last year against Syracuse, this duo combined for 128 yards on 13 carries, which is 9.8 yards per carry. Sounds like Syracuse's run defense against UConn got carved up, but in reality, what happened was Syracuse gave up 2 long runs in that game. And I understand that that's part of running the football. It's sometimes you're not going to do much, but all of a sudden you break that big one. You can't necessarily just erase the big plays that happen, but it should be acknowledged that in that game, there was a 71-yard touchdown and a 35-yard run by Brown in that one. Tackling is going to be critical for Syracuse, and we'll get to a play in just a moment, the 71-yard touchdown run. And UConn's going to be aggressive as well on offense, because last year, speaking of that 71-yard touchdown run by Edwards, it was a 4th and 1 at their own 29-yard line in the first quarter, and they were only down 7-0 in that one. So UConn, you can expect them to be quite aggressive against a team like Syracuse, where if it's 4th and reasonable in their own territory, they might not punt the football away. They might go for it. 4th and 1, 4th and 2, I would not be surprised if they decided to lean on that ground game and go for it early against Syracuse football. And on that play, Edwards had the first down, but it was really only going to be a 2 to 3 yard run. But of course, Syracuse football could not wrap up and make the tackle. He spun free. It became a 71-yard touchdown against Syracuse. Again, it's not just about the missed tackles if you are this Syracuse defense. It's the impact of the missed tackles. Last week against Tennessee, the 47-yard run by Deshaun Bishop at the end of the first half. It's not just about Tank Wilson missing a tackle 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage or Devin Grant diving at his feet at the line of scrimmage. It's the fact that then Deshaun Bishop takes it 47 yards. That's unacceptable. And what happened against Edwards last year on the 71-yard touchdown run was also unacceptable. I can live with a missed tackle with a 2-yard run becomes a 4-yard run. Point is, though, you got to wrap up against the UConn Huskies. You cannot have those big chunk plays like you had last year, because that's how UConn was really able to stay in the game. How many times last year did UConn really go down the field against this Syracuse defense? In large part, they relied on a lot of chunk plays, and credit to them for doing it. This year, if you're the Syracuse defense, can't have that happen. Have to avoid the missed tackles as much as possible. Now, their offensive line, they actually did lose an offensive lineman to the NFL, believe it or not, last year. Chase Lunt, who was a 6th-round pick by the Buffalo Bills. As far as I can tell, UConn has one starting offensive lineman from last year's game against Syracuse. Could be wrong on that, but that's what my eyes told me, so feel free to correct me in the comments section below. But it's actually a pretty good player that's returning from last year to this year for UConn. That is their center, Wes Ho. He's one of the better centers in all of college football. He was named to the 2025 preseason Remington Award watch list, which is given annually to the nation's top centers. So someone who you definitely have to keep an eye on UConn's offensive line. Syracuse fans, what do you think about UConn's offense? And do you think this defense can bounce back from their effort against Tennessee? Comment your thoughts in the comments section below. Coming up, we'll talk about UConn's defense and also their special teams. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel is quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to your Sundays. So are you ready to play on FanDuel? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real here for just a moment. Actually getting tickets for these games can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices miraculously jumping at the checkout. Like, what's going on here? I wanted to spend $50 on the game. Now you're telling me I have to spend $75? Really? That's why I use Gametime, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you're going to pay. Honestly, Gametime, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way I've bought tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKED. ONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. We've done a brief overview of UConn. We've talked about their offense. Now let's get into their defense and special teams for the matchup against Syracuse on Saturday at noon Eastern in the JMA Wireless Dome. Now, UConn runs a 3-3-5 base defense. That means 3 down defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs on the field. Their defensive line is brand new to this matchup against Syracuse football. None of their starting defensive linemen played in the matchup last year. They are all transfers. You got Ben Smiley, a redshirt senior defensive end, a transfer from Virginia. He made 12 starts over there in his career. Again, power conference transfer. There's more talent on this UConn team than prior years. You got Vincent Carroll-Jackson, a redshirt sophomore nose tackle, a transfer from Nebraska in the Big Ten. He played 11 games over there. Big Ten transfer, pretty big deal going up against Syracuse. And Stephon Wright, a grad student, a transfer from Texas Southern. But before that, he was at SMU for 3 years. So there's some pedigree on UConn's defensive line. They are not a pushover unit by any means. You got a transfer from Virginia, you got a transfer from Nebraska, and at one point, a transfer from SMU. No slouches along that defensive line. Their linebackers, Umar Diomande, hopefully I'm saying that right, got it from their pronunciation guide, a redshirt sophomore, weak side linebacker. He did play against Syracuse last season. He had 1 tackle. Last week, he made 7 tackles. By the way, he only had 7 tackles all season in 2024. So this is someone who's new to his role and got off to a nice start this season. You got Taekwon King, who is a redshirt senior middle linebacker, a transfer from Temple. He led Temple last year with 111 tackles. Pretty solid, Taekwon King. Donovan Branch, a senior strong side linebacker. He also played against Syracuse last season, and he had 2 tackles in that one. Their top cornerbacks. You got Devin Pringle, a redshirt senior, a transfer from Grand Valley State. He was excellent at Grand Valley State, making a jump with UConn this season. And then you also got Cam Chadwick, a redshirt sophomore, also played against Syracuse last year. He made 7 tackles in that game. Their top safeties. Now, this is unfortunate for UConn fans. Malachi McLean, he suffered an unfortunate injury in week 1. Good news, he is back with the UConn Huskies, but according to head coach Jim Mora, he will not play against Syracuse on Saturday. Real bummer, but taking his place is someone who is pretty good in his own right. I should say likely taking his place. Redshirt senior Tyrese Mills. He's actually a Penn State transfer from a year ago. He had an interception versus Boise State in the college football playoff last season. And he was supposed to be their backup, by the way. Just an FYI. Lee Millette, a senior. He played against Syracuse last year. He had 7 tackles in that one. And Damon Brinson, a senior, also played against Syracuse last year and made 2 tackles. It's a defense that on paper has a lot of power conference transfers, guys that succeeded at other schools that are making the jump to UConn, and also guys that are experienced in playing Syracuse from a year ago. I think Syracuse should be able to rack up some points against UConn. They were able to do it against Tennessee. But you know what? UConn, like the theme of this entire episode, they deserve respect. Much more talent on this team now than they had in prior years. As far as their special teams, we can just do their kicker and their punter. Chris Freeman is the kicker. He's back from last season. He went 20 of 26 last year, which is not bad, with a long of 53 yards. So UConn can attempt long field goals with a guy like Chris Freeman. He's got the leg to make it. And then you got punter Connor Stutz. He's also back from last year. He had 6 punts against Syracuse with an average of 47.5 yards. Very capable punter they got over there. So that's the UConn Huskies, a team that Syracuse should be able to beat. They are favored to beat, but Syracuse is going to also have to be on its A game. They cannot take UConn lightly. If they take UConn lightly, they're in trouble because UConn, unlike prior years, maybe before Jim Mora, there's definitely some talent on this roster. Comment your thoughts on the UConn Huskies in the comments section below. Give me your score prediction. Who do you got, Syracuse or UConn? I'll let you know right now. I am picking Syracuse to win this game, but I'll give you my score prediction later on in the show, or not this show, later on in the week. Now, as far as what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse here in the near future, tomorrow we got matchup keys versus UConn, how Syracuse can hold serve at home and knock off the UConn Huskies. We'll talk about that tomorrow. And then on Thursday, we got a crossover podcast with the new host of the Locked On UConn Huskies, Mike Manansky. Pleasure to have him on. Welcome to the Locked On Podcast Network. We'll talk with him on Thursday. That's what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse here in the near future. It's another big moment on Locked On. College football fans, Locked On and Fire TV present College Football Kickoff, your ultimate college football weekly preview. Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12 leads the conversation alongside two-time AP Coach of the Year Gary Patterson, former college star Jesse Holley, and Locked On's local experts. A college football preview only Locked On can do. Catch College Football Kickoff every Thursday throughout the season, only on Fire TV. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse, and I will see you all again soon.